Who is my neighbor? Is one of a series of questions for this month's sermon topics. Having been raised mainline Protestant, when I heard the question, who is my neighbor, I immediately thought of the Good Samaritan, and I probably could have recited it. But now I'm Unitarian Universalist. Now I raise questions. My first question is, why the question? What was going on in Jewish law, Jewish life at the time, that someone raised the question, who is my neighbor? We learned in adult forum that Jews like to question. They question now, they have always questioned. There were 613 laws in the Torah. There was a difference between foreigner and stranger. It was pretty logical that there was confusion around who is neighbor. So I don't think that person was testing Jesus. I think it was a legitimate question. Jewish practice at the time was very much caring for and about their own. They had had lots of history of outside people fighting with them. They were a close-knit community, and to most of them in their practice, neighbor meant another Jew or one that might become a Jew. So Jesus' point was, we need to be neighbor to everyone. We don't limit our neighborliness to just people who are like us. Okay, my next question was, or is, why did the Jews and the Samaritans hate each other? They only hated each other because they had different histories. And those histories went back 600 and 700 years. So one group's ancestors, when in exile to Babylon, those people could remain Jewish. They had their own community. They had their Jewish life, even though they lived in Babylon. And people from that community, after a while, were able to return and be Jews in their homeland. The other group, however, intermarried, used some of the religious practices of their host country, and when they returned to the Holy Land, they had a mix of practices. They were no longer pure Jews, but they were Samaritans. So that's the reason for their hate, just because they didn't accept each other's history and who each other were now. Now, we can take that to any of our prejudices and make it make just as much sense. How about the good fundamentalist? How about the good drug addict? How about the good welfare recipient? Whatever mine and your prejudice is, we can use that as a Good Samaritan story and for ourselves. And then I wonder, what did the scholars think about this parable? There's an organization called Jesus Seminar, and they evaluate what's in the Bible and decide or argue which was probably authentically from Jesus and which probably was added later. So 60% of that group said, yes, this is authentic, this is from Jesus. 29% said, it's probably authentic. So that was a large majority of this group of scholars. Some said it's not historically accurate. So then we're reminded, well, Jesus' purpose was not to tell history. Jesus' purpose was to tell a story to teach. I found a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. about the Good Samaritan, which is, on one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day, we must come to see that the whole Jericho Road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs transforming, needs restructuring. Okay, so there's lots in my head about neighbor, and I'm remembering going to a workshop, and that leader had lots to say about neighbor. Bob and I are workshop junkies. From the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, we went to frequent workshops. And often we went to a retreat center in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. That place is called Kirkridge. And the nicest time to be there is mid-August when the leaves are in color. So 4 years ago we said, let's go back to Kirkridge in October. So we looked through their catalog and chose a retreat led by Michael Morwood. We'd never heard of Michael Morwood, but the description of him was that he was a silenced Catholic priest. So we asked Jack Dewar if he knew Michael. Jack knew of him. He didn't know him personally. And Jack was really excited that we were going to his retreat. And it was a fun retreat for us. So Michael's story is that he wanted to update the science curriculum for and he lived in Australia, for the Australian Catholic schools. And because he was using pictures from the Hubble telescope and raising the question, where is God? Since we were no longer in the 2,000-year-old worldview of hell, earth, heaven, and God being in heaven, that no longer fit the curriculum of science in high schools. So he was updating it, and whatever the process is in the Catholic Church, he was silenced, both by his own archbishop and by the Vatican, which meant he could not set foot on Catholic schools. I don't think he was allowed to go to Mass, but he wasn't allowed to preach anymore. And at that point, he was still Catholic, and he was working to reform the church. We went back a couple years later, and by that time, Jack had died. And those of you who don't know Jack or didn't know Jack, he was a wonderful teacher and a wonderful presence here. He had left the priesthood many years before, and he did a lot of soul searching before he became a Unitarian Universalist, but he was a wonderful presence and a good teacher. So the last course that he taught in adult religious education, and because we meet on Sunday morning, we now call it the Sunday Morning Forum, the last course that he taught was The New Cosmology. And he introduced us to Thomas Berry and Brian Schwimm and the concepts of entering the Ecozoic era, that we indeed were on a cusp of new history and new cosmology, and we as humans had so much work to do to correct the injustices of the past and move forward. So, let me quote from Michael Morwood. This is what I remembered him telling us about Neighbor, and then I also found it in his book, in one of his books. Jesus believed the same divine reality within him was in the people listening to him. He not only wanted to set them free from whatever restrained or strangled that reality within them, he also gave clear guidance for how anyone might recognize that divine reality in themselves and in others. He insisted, "You are not to be proud-hearted, elitist, exclusive, or to act or to set yourself over others. You are to mourn with those who mourn. You are to work for justice. You are to be of service to others. You must be neighbor to all. You must be inclusive of all people. You must never be violent or seek to dominate or rule over others. Your intent must be pure, free from seeking power and prestige. You must be willing to stand up for what you believe. Believe that the kingdom of God is here within and among you. It is in your hands and in your power, and it is your responsibility to bring it to expression in the human community." So to emphasize what Michael said about neighbor, Jesus taught, you must be neighbor to all. You must be exclusive of all people. After Jack left us, my husband started buying books. Every few days there would be a little package from Amazon. So our bookshelf just crowded and overflowed. But they would be books about the universe, cosmos, future, environment, evolution, spirituality. And it was really very mind-opening to read those books. I don't think I've read them all yet, but I've read many of them. My favorite is Thank God for Evolution. That was written by Michael Dowd, and the Adult Forum is doing some Michael Dowd work, I think. They've done some. I think they're doing more. One of the big themes in these books was evolutionary consciousness or ecological consciousness. I kind of get what consciousness is, but I wanted to do some more reading, something that would speak to me. So I found How to Evolve in Your Lifetime by Douglas LeBeer, director of the Center for Progressive Development in Washington, D.C. And when I get my right paper up, I'll read what he had to say. Today's highly interconnected, interdependent world is arousing in people a new need or intent to evolve capacities that support both personal well-being and service to the common good, the larger human community. That is, capacities that promote the benefit of all, not just a few. This shift is both psychological and spiritual. We can shape and grow qualities of mind, emotion, and behavior. We can shape them within ourselves. And it's not far-fetched to think that we can do that. Holding a vision of possibility in your consciousness tends to pull you toward it. So now I respond with the newer question of, how am I neighbor? What does neighbor mean to me now? And clearly, it must mean more than caring about and being compassionate toward all people. The concept of neighbor must include all species, all resources, and we can even think of being neighbor to the future. And I think it's something we must do. I don't think we have a choice but to expand our view of neighbor, make it be for everything and everyone and everything that might be. Okay, so what am I, Alice Smith, going to do? I think two of our biggest problems is that we don't have enough appreciation of nature and that we overconsume. So I need to look at my consumption. I need to look at what I buy, why I buy it, do I already have enough, do I need it, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to take action, I decide that my intention is to live my life so there is money left over at the end of the month. I'm not taking it off the top of the month. I won't do that to my husband. That gives him too much anxiety. But I can live my life so there's money left over at the end of the month. And with that money, I can be generous or I can be saving for the future. If we look at our greed, the opposite of that is generosity. If we look at our consumption and our overconsumption, the opposite of that is simplicity. And I'm not sure where overconsumption becomes greed. And I really wonder, if I treat myself to a Reese's Pieces Blizzard or a Reese's Pieces anything, is that greed? And it kind of is, because it doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't have, it really in the long term doesn't benefit me. It's just immediate gratification. The only thing it does is maybe provide some jobs. But I think it's serious. I think it's serious the way we overconsume, whether it be food, whether it be other items that we buy. But I think it's very important that we look at our consumption and look at what we can do to change it. You probably observed that the question is reversed. Instead of who is my neighbor, that is, who cares about me, to whom am I neighbor? And I think we need to be neighbor to all people, all species, all resources, and the future. So let's call this neighborly evolution. May it be so.